Well, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today in this incredibly important and rather worrying webinar, NATO in the Arctic. My name is Pippa Bartolotti. I'm an author and politician. I work with the United National Anti-War Coalition and Global Women United for Peace Against NATO. This particular webinar was initiated by Women for Peace Finland and organised by Global Women for Peace United Against NATO, hosted by the International Peace Bureau. Thank you very much. So, just as a brief introduction, as the Arctic ice melts, so many of us are deeply concerned by the race to weaponize this once pristine environment. To explore the implications of this, we have brought you some really excellent speakers. The Arctic is warming nearly 4 times faster than the rest of the globe. And there's a kind of knock-on effect to that called the albedo effect, which means lack of ice means lack of white reflective material reflecting heat back into the atmosphere. The sea is darker, it absorbs more heat. It's really frightening. We don't know where the tipping point is in this, but we do know everything's happening a lot faster than we previously expected. So just as warm up about NATO, Admiral Bauer, the chair of the NATO Military Committee, said a few months ago, the Arctic remains essential to NATO's deterrence and defence posture. Well, Afghanistan and Libya know only too well the defence posture of NATO. So, we're all right to be worried. I'm going to hand over now for some opening words from Sean Connor, who is the Executive Director of the IPB. Sean.
Thank you, Pippa. If you'll bear with me for just 1 second, I'm also taking care of the tech for our webinar today, so I kind of have the dual role here. Just want to make sure everything is in order. But thank you, Pippa. Thank you to the Global Women United Against NATO for putting on this very important webinar and this very important topic today as we approach now the final weeks before NATO's 75th anniversary summit in Washington, D.C., where hopefully we'll see many of you in person with us, and those who cannot attend in person also online for our counter summit events that we will be hosting the weekend from the 5th to the 7th of July. Pippa has already given us an initial view of the picture of the rapid rise in temperatures that we're seeing in the Arctic region, and the danger this causes the entire planet as the huge white reflector that is the Arctic that has a strong role in keeping the Earth cool is fading away. Despite refreezing in the winter, the ice gets thinner and thinner every year and is melting much more rapidly in the summers, which has, among other things, opened up new marine shipping channels that NATO countries, as well as Russia, have taken advantage of, which is enhanced by their use of ice-breaking ships, which includes also nuclear-powered ice-breaking ships. More and more of these ships are under construction, and they are wreaking havoc already in the Arctic. While the ice is melting here, we see new security risks that emerge also from the melting of this ice, where the waters that were previously unnavigable are now potential security threats, and we know Russia in particular has the largest Arctic border by far, and naturally feels these security threats to a very large level, and this is something that we have to take into account. These threat perceptions of Russia and of NATO countries and how they're pushing us deeper and deeper into the militarization of the region. The Arctic is also rich in natural resources, whether it be oil and natural gas, but also minerals, which are increasingly important even as we go into a green transition. Minerals including iron ore, copper, nickel, zinc, phosphates, gold, diamonds, tungsten, and uranium even as well. And this is, of course, something that many nations would like to take advantage of, but is something that requires the climate to keep warming and things to get worse, which of course we cannot bear, we cannot stand. The Arctic also sits between the US and Russia, or NATO and Russia more specifically, as the two vie over the region for dominance. It was already a contested battleground even before recent years. In the Cold War, the Arctic was frequently addressed as an area of concern of the confrontation between NATO and the Soviet Union. In the post-Cold War period, we saw some dismantling of the military facilities, but even in that case, there were concerns over left behind nuclear or radioactive pollution in the Arctic region. And so as we see a new push towards militarization, we should naturally be concerned of what happens even as if we're able to push the militarization back, what the long-term pollution to the region could be, and to fight back against this as well. Since the mid-2000s in particular, the resurgence of NATO presence in the Arctic region is extremely concerning. NATO countries are claiming, of course, Russia started it, this childish finger pointing, and they also not only limited to Russia, but also accused China of increasing their influence in the region because they have an interest over these resources, as if NATO countries themselves don't have the interest, including many which are not Arctic surrounding countries. The US resumed anti-submarine warfare exercises outside of Iceland around 2008, I believe it was. And in 2018, NATO nations staged one of the alliance's largest exercises, the Trident Juncture, off the coast of Norway, with a focus specifically on the Arctic region. This included 65 ships, 250 aircraft, and 50,000 personnel involved. They claim this was in response directly to Russia. But of course, we can't go without saying that the connection between climate change and militarism is not just the melting ice, but that the militaries themselves, of course, have an extremely large emission rate, greenhouse gas emissions. And to have exercises with 65 ships and 250 aircraft, you can be sure that this is doing nothing to reduce the pollution and the melting of the ice, but is only exacerbating it even farther. The militarization of the region is extremely dangerous, both in terms of escalation around existing conflicts and to the myriad of negative consequences for the environment and the Arctic. NATO and Russia together dominate the Arctic region and therefore must work together to prevent further escalation, further militarization, and the exploitation writ large of the region. There are several ways this can be done, and I think our speakers today will go into both where the problems exist within their own nations, but hopefully also the actions that are being taken, the ways that we can push our governments towards peace in the Arctic in particular. But I would just like to bring up a couple that have been of our interest here at the IPB. One is the Arctic Council, which is an intergovernmental forum promoting cooperation in the Arctic, including Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden, and the US. It also includes various indigenous peoples groups representing the interests of these indigenous peoples, something that we cannot leave out of the conversation over peace and climate change in the Arctic region. And it has a number of working groups, but sadly, none of the working groups focus on the militarization of the Arctic. There are also observer states from all around the world included within the Arctic Council, and NGOs and intergovernmental organizations as observers. There was, however, from the period of 2021 to 2023, where Russia had the rotating presidency of the Arctic Council, a complete boycott of all the other nations of the Arctic to even hold meetings, which removes any chance really of creating dialogue, understanding, cooperation towards the prevention of militarization in the region. So the Arctic Council has not really had any positive roles at this point, but perhaps could serve as a forum in the future should the parties approach it in the manner of goodwill. Finally, there are also civil society groups such as the Marine Arctic Peace Sanctuary, or MAPS, which seeks to find compromise and promise that the Arctic region will remain one of peace that is protected from militarization and climate change. MAPS prohibits all commercial and military shipping traffic, seismic survey, all extractive processes, including the harvesting of living resources, except for local subsidence, the disposal of waste materials or other pollutants, and the construction of artificial islands in the Arctic region. So there are groups that are doing good work on this, and I think we're going to hear about many more from our speakers today. I'm very much looking forward to learning from everyone here and together taking action to prevent further militarization, pushing back, and creating really a zone of peace in the Arctic for the planet, for the people, for us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was a really good introduction. And I think, you know, with pushback, we've got to support those who are pushing back as well as doing our thing for peace in the region and enabling peace in the region. So now let's move on now. This first part of the webinar is about the US, Canada, and Russia. Our first speaker is from the US. And as you know, because the US is in Alaska, the 49th state is Alaska, that makes them an Arctic power. So Bruce Gagnon, the United Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, is the coordinator of that. And he's going to talk to us right now about breaking Russia up to get at Arctic resources. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I'm just going to share my screen here. And okay, does everybody can see it?
Not yet. Here we go. Yes.
Okay, very good. As you can see, Russia has the largest land border with the Arctic. Due to climate change and melting ice, Western resource extraction corporations want to control the region. Drill, baby, drill. Take over Russia's vast resource base. For more than 500 years, various European nations have invaded Russia, virtually every 100 years or so. Take a moment and look at this graphic, which details Arctic resources that are largely, again, along Russia's border. I would submit that much of the reason for Ukraine being used as a proxy in the US-NATO war on Russia is this reality. Note the graphic on the left, a US-NATO Arctic study and the 2014 date where this study originated. There is much linkage between the US Arctic strategy and the US orchestrated coup in Kiev in 2014. Another key 2014 event was this US Navy submarine public relations journey under the Arctic ice. New York Times columnist Tom Friedman wrote this piece. Along for the ride was the then Navy Admiral and Chief of Staff and US Senator Angus King, an independent from Maine, the state where I live in. King is a huge Russia hater, and Maine is a northern state near the Arctic. So just to read this quote, in our lifetime, what was in effect land and prohibitive to navigate and explore is becoming an ocean, and we'd better understand it, noted Admiral Greenart. Quote, we need to be sure that our sensors, weapons, and people are proficient in this part of the world so that we can own the undersea domain and get anywhere there, unquote. Because if the Arctic does open up for shipping, it offers a much shorter route from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific rather than the Panama Canal, saving huge amounts of time and fuel. I think it's pretty obvious what the Admiral is saying here. We want to own the undersea domain. That's a telling statement for sure. And the New York Times broadcasting that speaks for itself as well. The RAND Corporation has released several internal studies on the plan to break up Russia, including Foreign Policy Magazine, the one on the right, which is the Deep State Journal of the Council on Foreign Relations. They make it clear what the true agenda is: break Russia up into pieces. Estonia's Prime Minister Kallas has also made it clear that the goal is to break Russia into smaller nations. She says in this article, Russia's defeat is not a bad thing, because then you know there could really be a change in society, and that it would be better if there were more smaller countries where Russia is such a big country today, she says. I've seen several different proposed Russia breakup maps created by Western sources. This reflects a supreme arrogance that has no respect for national sovereignty. How would Washington respond if Russia or China were to release maps of a broken up Russia, or excuse me, a broken up USA, and at the same time, Russia and China held continuous war games along the Russian borders? The US would go ballistic, no doubt about it. NATO has constant war games in the Arctic region. The Navy, the Air Force, Army, and Marines, and all the NATO members working together to plan for warfare in the Arctic region against Russia. On the right is a photo from a US NATO war game in Norway. The US has created weapons depots or weapons hubs in Norway and also in Poland. The bottom picture on the left is the US weapons hub in Poland. So after these war games, the US ships over massive amounts of equipment on Navy ships. After the war games, they store it in Norway and in Poland for future use. Is that the purpose? A war with Russia? Is this why they're storing this? This was a US NATO war game called Cold Response. And just below it, you see the dates of the war game, March to April 2022. And please note just below, this language just below the date, I took off the Cold Response War Game website from NATO, and they say that this was a long planned exercise, bringing together thousands of troops from NATO allies and partners. So Cold Response began almost immediately after the Russian special military operation began in February of 2022. Moscow always said that they launched the SMO in late February of 2022 because intelligence reported that Ukraine, with full US NATO support, was planning a massive attack on the Donbass. the Russian ethnic region of eastern Ukraine, right along the Russian border. And now that Sweden and Finland have joined NATO, the situation is even more dangerous. This is the US Globus 3 radar in Vardo on Norway's border with Russia. Globus would be used in a US NATO first strike attack on Russia. After a US first strike, the radar would also help track and target any remaining Russian nuclear retaliatory capability after the US NATO first strike attack. In addition, it would also monitor activities of the Russian fleet in the Arctic and help target the fleet in a US NATO attack. Recently, the US NATO supplied weapons were used by Ukraine to hit an early warning radar inside of Russia. You might have heard about that. These Russian early warning radar sites are used to monitor potential US nuclear attacks. And so this attack on Russia's early morning radar was a hugely dangerous and provocative attack on Russia's military, forcing them to become even more on the alert. Add in the fact that the United States has nuclear weapons at bases throughout Europe, which can be placed on F-16 warplanes that are soon to be transferred into Ukraine, possibly with US NATO pilots and ground crews, because Ukraine doesn't yet have the pilots and the ground crews to keep all of these planned F-16s flying. NATO plans to hold their 75th anniversary celebration in Washington in early July. I will be joining the Peace Summit and Rally in DC on July 6 and 7, along with other members of the global network. I hope that as many people as possible will be there. Let me ask this question in conclusion. Why is NATO still in operation today? And why is NATO now moving into the Asia Pacific surrounding China? Who is the real threat to world peace today? Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bruce. That was horrifyingly interesting. I think that we really need to be sharpening our pencils, as it were, to work against what is going on now. Our next speaker is from Canada, Canada has a huge shoreline with the Arctic. Tamara Lorincz. She's with the Voice of Women for Peace and the militarization of Canada's Arctic. So, Tamara, please, if you're ready, would you go ahead?
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you all. I also have a PowerPoint presentation to share, so I'll just get it up right now. Here we go. So I have given a title to my presentation, Mourned for the Inuit, Weep for the Whales and Polar Bears, Canada's militarization of the Arctic threatens communities, the climate, and peace. To add to what Bruce said, In 2019, then US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo gave a major address entitled Looking North, Sharpening America's Arctic Focus. He said, quote, "The Arctic is at the forefront of opportunity and abundance. It houses 13% of the world's undiscovered oil, 30% of the undiscovered gas, an abundance of uranium, rare earth minerals, gold, diamonds, and millions of square miles of untapped resources, fisheries galore. And its centerpiece, the Arctic Ocean, is rapidly taking on new strategic significance," unquote. Not once did he mention climate change. This is what the United States that dominates NATO is after in the Arctic, the access and control of its natural resources and sea routes. Fast forward 3 years in Canada, in June of 2022, 4 months after Russia's invasion, the Canadian government announced it would invest $38.6 billion over 20 years to modernize the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD. This is the Continental Defense Partnership established between Canada and the United States in 1958. But there were not many details given about what NORAD modernization would entail at that time. Then 2 months later, in August of 2022, Prime Minister Trudeau welcomed NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg to Nunavut. It was the first time a NATO Secretary General had visited Canada's Arctic. Trudeau and Stoltenberg toured one of the sites of the Northern Warning System. They also visited Fort Wing in Cold Lake, Alberta, which is Canada's largest, busiest Air Force base. Stoltenberg said at the time that his visit showed the strategic importance of Canada's northern territories for the Euro-Atlantic Alliance. And our Prime Minister called Canada's Arctic NATO's western and northern flanks. Then last year, Canada's Senate, an unelected body, released their study entitled Arctic Security Under Threat, Urgent Needs in a Changing Geopolitical and Environmental Landscape. They said Canada's north is militarily exposed, economically underdeveloped, and threatened by climate change, while the world powers covet its resources and Arctic waterways. There were 23 recommendations which really describe a vast plan to militarize the Arctic. And if you read between the lines, the senators are calling for Canada to join US ballistic missile defense. There is not one recommendation for building peace or reducing carbon emissions. This year, on April 8th, Trudeau and Defense Minister Bill Blair, and this is our defense minister with Melanie Joly in the Arctic, released a new defense policy update called Our North Strong and Free, a renewed vision for Canada's defense. And now it gives more detail about NORAD modernization and NATO's plans in the Arctic. The government will buy new weapon systems and build new military infrastructure across the Northern Territories. New forwarding bases will be set up in Inuvik, Yellowknife, Iqaluit, and Goose Bay with a permanent presence of Canadian and American soldiers. New integrated radar and missile systems, surveillance platforms, maritime sensors, and cyber operations will also be installed and integrated with the United States command structure. The federal government will construct or expand runways, hangars, and roads for the military. Canada has signed contracts for 140 tactical American-made aircraft, including the F-35 fighter jets, anti-submarine aircraft, attack helicopters, and armed drones, as well as strategic tankers. The government is also spending $60 billion for new surface combatants. These are diesel-powered warships, and is exploring the procurement of new submarines. These fossil fuel-powered vehicles will be deployed in the north, releasing excessive carbon emissions and risking toxic contamination. And to pay for all of this, the Trudeau government is massively increasing military spending over the next 5 years. The Canadian Armed Forces have increased 4 times the number of military exercises they conduct in the north as part of Operation Nanook. I mean, just look at the environmental destruction that is caused by these exercises. NATO allies are also increasing their presence and tempo in the north. You've heard this from Bruce. This year, 90,000 Allied personnel conducted NATO's biggest exercises since the end of the Cold War, Steadfast Defender, which ran from January to the end of May of this year, and over 1,000 Canadian soldiers, including special forces, participate in this exercise. And the first phase of the exercise focused on the rapid deployment and combat in the North Atlantic, the Arctic, and the Baltic Sea. In a CBC interview, Chief Warrant Officer Terence Wolniak described Canada's military plans in the Arctic as, quote, "The idea is to train for war and be prepared to fight war." Yet, for the Indigenous people of the Arctic, the Inuit, their territory is not a theater of war. They want their homeland since time immemorial, and what they call Inuit Nunavut, protected, not militarized. They are the stewards of the land, and they know that it is threatened by climate change, and they are also in a desperate state of chronic poverty. The Arctic plays a crucial role in the regulation of the global climate system, but it is warming 4 times faster than anywhere else on the planet. It is experiencing dramatic sea level rise and coastal erosion. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said that climate change is causing severe impacts to the region, such as more intense fires and flooding. Last year, the city of Yellowknife was evacuated, the entire city, because of a massive out-of-control wildfire. The warming of the Arctic does not justify more militarism, but less. As the permafrost melts and the ocean acidifies, Arctic wildlife is becoming increasingly threatened. Bowhead whales, narwhals, seabirds, seals are all species at risk. There was a report in CBC News 2 days ago that scientists are predicting the extinction of polar bears in the next 2 decades. Now, the Canadian government is saying that climate change is making the Arctic more accessible to Russia and China, and they are the supposed threats that justify Canada's massive militarization of the North. But it's really important to remember that Russia and China have repeatedly issued public statements expressing their desire for peace and cooperation with the West. In fact, China has offered to Canadian Indigenous communities to help build infrastructure in their territories that have been neglected for decades by the federal government. Moreover, the Inuit themselves have called for peace and have opposed the militarization of their homeland. For the past 4 decades, Canada's Inuit have cooperated and engaged in peace building with the Indigenous people of the other Arctic nations through the Inuit Circumpolar Council and the Arctic Council that Sean described. In 1989, the Inuit Circumpolar Council's then president, Mary Simon, wrote a really important article entitled "Towards an Arctic Zone of Peace and Inuit Perspective." And she wrote, quote, "Any excessive military buildup in the North only serves to divide the Arctic, perpetuates East-West tensions and the arms race, and put our people on opposing sides. For these and other reasons, Arctic militarization is not in the interests of the Inuit in Canada, the Soviet Union, now Russia, Alaska, and Greenland, nor do such military preparations further security or world peace," unquote. And she proposed steps that Arctic states could take to designate the region a zone of peace and free of nuclear weapons. Simon is now the Governor General of Canada. So the Canadian Voice of Women and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Canada, we sent an urgent letter to the Governor General expressing our opposition to the militarization of the North. And we sent her a copy of this old article that she wrote. And we asked her to renew her appeal to make the Arctic a zone of peace and a nuclear weapons-free zone as the climate crisis and conflict escalate. Now, we haven't heard from her, but 2 weeks ago, I also want to mention that the current president of the ICC In March of 2022, just a couple of weeks after Russia's invasion, they released a statement, and I'm going to put it in the chat. It's very important. I just want to read this line because this was their response to what is going on in Ukraine. They said, quote, "The Inuit are committed to the Arctic remaining a zone of peace," a phrase coined by the former USSR President Mikhail Gorbachev in a 1987 speech in Murmansk. The ICC has repeatedly echoed this message in all of its guiding documents, in which it has mandated to lay the groundwork to declare the Arctic as a peaceful zone. So 2 weeks ago, we created this new banner, and it says, "Stop the militarization of the North, Canada out of NORAD and NATO, make the Arctic a zone of peace, protect Indigenous people, cooperate on climate." And we stood outside of the Governor General's office. We also took our new banner and stood outside of the US Embassy and on Parliament Hill. We believe that there are many ways that we can navigate towards peace in the Arctic without warplanes and without warships. We don't need NORAD and NATO. We need to get out of these military alliances. What we need is diplomacy and international law. And one of the most important things that we can do is take it upon ourselves to build peace. This is a picture of Oleg and I in St. Petersburg when I was there in November of 2022 with my banner, "No to NATO, yes to peace and cooperation." And I am going to be joining Bruce in Washington, D.C. for the big summit, "No to NATO, yes to peace and cooperation" on July 6th and 7th. We urge you to come to D.C. and to join us in action. And if you can't join us, please do an action where you are locally. I also want to say this week on Wednesday, the NATO Secretary General will be in Ottawa. Please come to a rally in front of the Prime Minister's office at 3 p.m. We also have a really important parliamentary petition calling for Canada to withdraw from NATO. I will put all of this information in the chat. And then I finally want to mention to you that we have a new women's movement, Women Against NATO. We have a declaration. Please go to our website, Women Against NATO, sign the declaration. We are calling on all women to take a picture of themselves with a sign and to share it with us. The email is in the chat. Please follow us on social media. We have these new accounts. Thank you so much for your time listening. Let's work together to make the Arctic a zone of peace, not war. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tamara. Your passion is so evident, and the work you've done on this is fantastic. You're so inspiring. And yes, get down to Washington, D.C., the 6th and 7th of July, NATO's birthday celebrations. We need to make a statement there. And I just want to underline again that all these preparations in the Arctic, not a word about dialogue or peace for the good of the planet, of humanity, of wildlife, for the good of anything. They say that the melting of the Arctic is an opportunity. Unfortunately, it's been taken as an opportunity by all the wrong people for all the wrong reasons. Now, moving swiftly on, I'd like to introduce you, well, Tamara has already done that in a way, Oleg Bodrov, who is a physicist, ecologist, board member of the International Peace Bureau, chairman of the Public Council of the South Coast of the Gulf of Finland, St. Petersburg, Russia. His presentation is entitled "Victory with Weapons is Impossible in the Atomic the Atomic World." Okay, Oleg, if you're ready, over to you for your presentation.
First of all, thank you for the invitation to this webinar, and I like very much Tamara presentation, and I remember very well our meeting in St. Petersburg, and I received so very good optimism for our common activities in future. And when I started to prepare for this webinar, I decided to change a little bit the name of my presentation. But in the end of my speech today, I will show one map, and it will be illustration why did it not possible to win if we will start military conflict between NATO and Russia. And the title of my presentation today is Russian Arctic, Plans and Reality. 2 years before so-called special military cooperation in Ukraine, Russian government adopted this strategy, the development of Arctic zone and ensuring the national security of the Russian Federation until 2035. This document was adopted, and I'd like to inform you about a very important fact from this document. It will be important for the discussion in future. First, the Northern Sea route along the Russian Arctic from Europe to the Far East and to the Asia-Pacific region is 3 times shorter than the traditional one. Second fact, the Russian Arctic region is 28% of the Russian territory, where live 2.6 million people, and this is more than 50% of the Arctic inhabitants of the all countries. Fact number 3, the Russian Arctic produce 80% of the Russian gas and 17% of oil. Fact number 4, there are 19 small nations live in the Arctic region. The traditional way of life of these nations is associated with the Arctic habitat. It's talk about the supporting of the cooperation of small nations living in the Arctic zone in different countries. Fact number 5. In the Arctic zone, there are military facilities of strategic forces to protect inhabitant national interests. So we have a very special fact that they plan to develop the very special troops in the Arctic region. Fact number 6. Climate warming in the Arctic is from 2 to 2.5 times faster than on our planet as a whole. So for the development of Arctic, it is planned to create civilian infrastructure as well as special units for the National Guards and special troops. It is proposed to build 8 icebreakers, including 5 nuclear ones. It is planned to build new ports, and it is planned to create protected national protected areas and environmental monitoring. And for the operation of this infrastructure, Russian government decided to develop small nuclear power plants in the Arctic Russia. They already started to, they already put into operation one of them, and they plan to create more, to construct more. It is proposed to develop international cooperation in the Arctic zone, including within the framework of the Arctic Council. The strategy speaks of the need for civil society participation to develop this Arctic strategy. Now, these plans are changing because we have a Ukrainian war. Cooperation with the Arctic Council has been stopped. I discussed with colleagues from the environmental NGO from the Arctic region of Russia about this their participation in the framework of the National Arctic Strategy. They don't plan to participate. The most active organizations receive the status of foreign agent from Ministry of Justice of Russia. One of my colleagues, I mean, not colleague, personal colleague, but one of the organization conducted the effective campaign against the transportation of municipal waste by rail from Moscow. It was supposed to store this waste in the Arctic zone. And my colleague, ecologist, mobilized the local population and won. This project stopped. But like result of this activity, they received the status foreign agent. And this status very limit his activities. So if a Russian NGO cooperate with the partner from NGO from other countries, they receive the status foreign agent and cannot work effectively. Officials do not like NGOs that criticize. At the same time, officials register their own NGO. We call this NGO governmental, non-governmental organizations, which is simulate of the public participation in the decision-making process. In fact, such organizations always support decision makers. Thus, the possibilities for effective cooperation between NGOs from Russia and other countries are very limited, as is the ability to influence to decision makers. Mobilization and militarization and nuclearization are now taking place in Arctic. And in this process involve Rosatom. It is a Russian state corporation. It is, they have status like organization which is responsible for the Arctic transportation by icebreaker. And in the same time, we have a very strong development of the cooperation with China in this area. So business interests play key role in this process. And now I'd like to show you one slide which is illustrate the situation with just a moment. Can you see this?
Yes, yes, thank you, we can.
Colleagues, this is brown line. It is line of the confrontation between NATO and Russia. From the right side of this map, you can see the territory of the Russia and Belarus. From the left side, it is NATO countries. It is catchment area of the Baltic Sea. And in the top of this map, you can see the nuclear power plants in the Arctic region. Now we have 17 nuclear reactors operate in this area. And in the same time, very close with each nuclear power plant, we have temporary spent fuel rod storages. And in these storages accumulated hundreds tons of plutonium. This is plutonium 239, and this radionuclide have half-life time 24,000 years. And in the same time, already published the scenario possible development of the military conflict of the NATO and Russia in this area. And according to this plan, which we translated into Russian from the German magazine, NATO planned to destroy the Russian Navy base in Kaliningrad here, and they want to block the Russian Navy close to St. Petersburg. I'm sure that Russian admirals have a similar plan how to act in the Baltic Sea region. And it's not possible to give guarantee that the spent fuel rods from the close to nuclear power plants or in the storages will not destroy it. And it will be high risk because we have too many tons of plutonium in this area. And I estimated that in Leningrad nuclear power plant, it is the biggest nuclear power plant in Russia, we have 1 billion lethal concentration of plutonium in this nuclear power plant. So if this power plant and if this spent fuel rods storage destroyed, it will be a collapse of the life in the all Baltic Sea region where live 90 million people in 9 countries. So I think reasonable if we will prepare a special report about new challenges, new risks, which is connected with so-called military, with so-called peaceful nuclear technologies. And it is not really peaceful. And so I'd like to stop in this. Thank you.
Oleg, that was fascinating. Thank you very, very much indeed for the work you have done on this and what you continue to do. In fact, you know, I feel that your suggestion to do a paper on the risks and challenges in the Arctic as the ice melts would be worthy. I think I think a lot of people would like to contribute to that. Well, that brings us to the end of our first half. I have scanned the questions and I can't really see any unless anybody has a particular question. We only have a few minutes. I do have one question which I would like to put to our 3 previous speakers, and that is with regard to the melting of the permafrost in the Arctic area, the stability of the ground, and the potential for disaster with some of these large military installations and nuclear installations that are likely to be built there. Do any of you have any particular knowledge or feelings about this? Perhaps put your hand up. Oleg, would you like to speak to this? You're muted at the moment.
Please repeat your question, please.
Yes, it was regarding the melting of the permafrost in the Arctic region, the stability of the land, and some of these huge installations that are going to be built in that area, and the risk really of putting buildings in an unstable ground.
I think it is a high risk because the Arctic environment very sensitive for the temperature, and of course some of the animal will be, for example, some of the biodiversity will, will collapse in this area. In the same time, it is a risk not only with the melting of the ice, but also if we will lose the control of the gas.
The methane.
Yes. And it will be you know, it is greenhouse gases, and it's not so easy to stop if we'll start military process, if we'll destroy this gas station, and who will stop this process. I remember when it was Soviet Union, one time it's happened in Uzbekistan, and this station produce gas, very strong pressure during 2 years. It was not possible to stop this gas emission, and only nuclear, they special, Rosatom organized special explosion of the nuclear weapons in this area. And after that, they stop this process. And it will be not possible to stop gas emission if we'll start military operation in the Arctic region. It will be a total risk for everybody, not only for the environment, but for all our planet. In the same time, I think usually we say that the level of the ocean will change, but this situation will be really if the ice melt in the mountain or in the Antarctica, not in the polar region. So that's...
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Oleg. Tamara.
Well, let me just add quickly that the Senate report, the Canadian Senate report that I referred to that came out last year, does mention this problem about the thawing of the permafrost and how this might have an impact on military infrastructure. What I fear is that the military is going to try to put more heavy duty concrete structures or something to try to stabilize things that will just cause cascading problems. The other thing is they don't recognize how the thawing of the permafrost threatens species at risk, and it's also a huge problem for Indigenous communities. I'll put a link into this chat to this amazing webinar that I listened to a few months ago about how Indigenous communities are really struggling with the loss of permafrost, and just to think that we're going to militarize their homeland with fighter jet runways when they're struggling like this is just so irresponsible and cruel. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is I have been to the last 3 climate summits, the COPs, and I have attended many of the oceans events and meetings and at the climate summits, and the issue of militarization never comes up, but it's something that I always raise in the audience during the Q&A period. And last year in Dubai, 2 American officials came up to me privately and said, we are concerned about how the US is militarizing the oceans, but we can't speak out like you are. And so this is something that we really need to bring to the attention of the climate and environmental community as well, about this plan to militarize the Arctic. But I fear, and this relates to something that Oleg said about foreign agents in Russia, I fear that a lot of environmental groups are compromised, and it's something that maybe we can discuss at another time. Thank you.
Thank you. We're almost on the hour. I noticed Palle Benson has his hand up. Palle, you will be speaking in the second half. Would you like to just speak purely to this question raised, or perhaps include it later?
Okay, I can wait if we are in trouble with the time. Okay.
We're not exactly in trouble, but I would rather our speakers ran on whilst they're speaking, if you see what I mean. All right, well, from all our hearts to our speakers' hearts, my great thank you for being here and contributing to this vital and terrifying webinar. We can't thank you enough for joining us. We wish you much more power than you have. I think we wish ourselves more power than we had as well, but if we join up and stay joined up, we do have some power, and we've got to keep using it. So thank you so much for joining us, to Tamara, to Bruce, and to Oleg. I hope you'll stay and listen to some of the second half as well. Well, here we go then. We're going to move on to a different area, to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and Greenland. So we have 4 speakers in this next session. The first of which is Ingeborg Brenes, who is the former chair of the IPB and a UNESCO director. She's speaking to the militarization, especially in the Norwegian Arctic, about new American bases and the Arctic Council. Now, Ingeborg she's inside the Arctic Circle and has a very unstable connection. So if it proves too difficult, she will go to sound only and cancel her picture. So Ingeborg, I don't know if you're ready to start, but if you are, please carry on.
Thank you, and dear friends, I'm greeting you from the wild and beautiful Arctic, inhabited by some 4 million people, an Arctic that is presently attracting huge international interest as a dramatic warming of the region and melting of the ice open for more fisheries, more drilling of oil and gas, and extractions of minerals from the seabed, and also allows for new and efficient transportation routes, notably in the Northeast Passage. This new situation with broader access to valuable natural resources and trade routes adds to the already existing East-West tension and heavy militarization of the area. This is in fact the 3rd time we are talking about NATO's northern expansion and the encircling of Russia and its consequences in this context. And what is new today for me is that I can bring into this very dark and scary developments some small, positive, new, optimistic tunes from the Arctic Council, and I get back to that. The situation in the Arctic has become dramatically worse, with Sweden and Finland becoming full-fledged members of NATO. We witness an enormous expansion of US bases, or so-called joint areas, in the Nordic countries, with 47 bases as of now. In Norway, we have 12 new American bases, the last 8 made operational only 1 week ago. With these bases, the United States of America is in fact able to attack Russia next door with nuclear weapons without the knowledge of the Nordic countries. A potential war between US and Russia risks to be played out on Norwegian and Nordic soil. Norway has for many years been considered the eyes and ears of NATO in the north, which in practical terms means sharing vital military information with the US government and probably also helping direct long-distance weaponry. The new military bases come in addition to these sophisticated American and NATO military installations of surveillance and spy facilities that the Norwegian government has already allowed for years. These decisions have to a very limited degree been known to the public, perhaps not even to the majority of the parliamentarians. The government has also allowed Allied nuclear submarines into Norwegian harbors, notably in Bergen and Tromsø. NATO and US military exercises are much more frequent, bigger, and closer to the Russian border than ever before. The war games interrupt and threatens also local and indigenous food security. People, to the extent that they are informed, are bewildered when it comes to the new military bases as to whether they are NATO or US bases. The confusion created is probably deliberate. The public has over time been led to think that NATO is essential for Norwegian security. With the uncertainties and the dramatic decline in US democracy, people may well have been skeptical to these new bases if they knew they were based on bilateral agreements between Norway and the US. Although it is important to underline that these bases are not NATO bases, NATO is, of course, almost totally controlled by the United States and is an instrument in their explicit fight for world hegemony, economically and militarily, on land, on and in the sea, in the air, and in outer space. As for Norway, this happens in blatant disregard of the previous policy of having neither foreign bases nor nuclear weapons on Norwegian soil in times of peace, and in disregard of paragraph 1 of the Constitution guaranteeing Norwegian sovereignty. Obviously, this ongoing militarization in the Arctic will provide not more security as promised and proclaimed by the government, but less. The escalation is also considered by Russia as a serious and additional threat to their security. If the Russian president's main security concern is to keep NATO away from their borders, he has indeed obtained the opposite, resulting in a particular dangerous confrontation. It is difficult not to compare with the Cuba crisis in 1962, where J.F. Kennedy and Khrushchev's willingness to discuss took us away from the brink of nuclear war. Is there some wisdom somewhere today? The Nordic countries have, through this process, become part of the global network of US military bases outside their own country, considered to be between 800 and 1,000 in some 80 countries. For comparison, Russia is supposed to have 8 bases on foreign ground and China 1. Nordic defense has been seriously more Americanized in a short time, nearly without debate. Warfare seems suddenly to be more important than welfare, which used to be the hallmark of the Nordic countries. In the frenzy both to produce and use ever more lethal weapons, the existential threat posed by the climate and environmental crisis is almost a non-issue. No talk about the military as a tremendous polluter and that the bases are environmentally disastrous and outside national ecological jurisdiction and protection. Also in this context, we see that international law, as developed by the UN, is de facto replaced by neoliberal so-called rules-based world order, profiting the big Western powers, both countries and multinationals. I cannot stop wondering how it is possible, how it became possible that the small, presumably enlightened Nordic countries, ranking on top of all democracy lists, consider the US to be our best ally and the one to guarantee our security, when history shows that the US follows their own imperial interest in Latin America, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, ++, and right now is headed by a warmongering president, rejecting all attempts for ceasefire and peace negotiations, and supporting the genocide in Gaza with ever more lethal weapons, and vetoes in the Security Council against the rulings of the International Court of Justice, and there are no good alternatives in sight. Norway has previously been of the view that a friendly country with a good internal welfare system, solidarity with people in need, and generous foreign development aid, as well as being a strong supporter of the UN, would be the best guarantee of our security. Now, with NATO and the strong Stoltenberg effect on the Norwegian government and his native country, the majority, at least as expressed by most politicians, corporate media, and many academics, seem to think that peace necessitates military might. How come? The narrative is scary, asking people to prepare for war, whilst at the same time almost presenting it as if there are no other options. It is indeed a dilemma that most people in Norway are against nuclear weapons, but at the same time support an oversized, outdated military alliance based on nuclear strategies and with the first use doctrine. Massive, long-term, binding military budgets are accepted by all political parties in Norway. The US is, in fact, braving or occupying parts of Norway almost to full applause. Unnuanced enemy images of Russia are used to legitimize this confrontation that might lead to a devastating World War III, potentially wiping out the human species. Where has our humanism and common sense gone? Where are the political leaders who have the courage and integrity to guide us out of the tense and polarized situation of warmongering and war propaganda? Who is ready to use paragraph 13 of NATO Charter, saying that when you have been a member of NATO for a year, you can leave just by informing the American government, who will subsequently inform the others? This militarization happens in parallel to an almost total nullification of diplomatic and business relations between Norway and Russia. Norway almost fully participates in US and EU sanctions, except to a limited degree in relation to fisheries and safety at sea. A new Iron Curtain is established with detrimental effects, not least on the important cooperation between the different indigenous groups. The cooperation, the Arctic Council, already mentioned by Sean, is the most important forum for handling Arctic questions. The focus of the Council is on environment, climate, and sustainable development, on pollution, biodiversity, oil spill search and rescue. Political issues are supposed to be kept outside. The Arctic Council was established in 1996, and it consists of 8 countries, not elected, but by geography. The 5 Nordic countries, Canada, Russia, and the United States of America, and 6 indigenous groups with permanent representation. What is new is that Norway is, for the time being, chairing for a 2-year period the Arctic Council. The permanent secretariat is in the Arctic town of Tromsø, and I recently were in contact with the Secretariat of the Arctic Council, and they told me that 2 months back, they have managed to reopen the scientific cooperation in the 6 different working groups. and they pay tribute to Russian cooperation and say that they informally have been in contact over a period of time. It is very important to keep the dialogue going in the Arctic Council. So it is in our interest to keep informed about their work, to encourage their cooperation within all the 8 countries, and also to request transparency, and not least in relation to the effects of militarization on the Arctic people's life and well-being.
Ingeborg, are you nearly there?
I'm finishing now.
Thank you.
Just to say that for many years it was important to Norway to keep a certain balance between deterrence and reassurance in the dialogue with the Soviet Union and later with Russia. Now we have to insist on no to a militaristic definition of security. NATO must never replace the UN. Instead of the old patriarchal model of economic growth, militarism, competition, and confrontation with warfare over welfare, which risk leading ultimately to apocalypse, we acutely need to strengthen our peace and disarmament processes, including eliminating nuclear arms, and instead build trust, solidarity, and a culture of peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ingeborg. That was fascinating and a lot to learn and take in there. I'm going to move now on to a speaker from Sweden, Lars Drake, who is the environmental economist and former adjunct professor at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. Lars is speaking to natural resources in the Arctic, extraction, environmental, and international conflicts. Lars, if you are ready, please continue with your presentation.
Thank you. And I have some PowerPoint presentation, if it works.
Oh, well, I hope it does.
It doesn't look like it should.
Have you gone to shared screen?
Sorry about that. Yes, I did try to share the screen. This green one, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. I had it prepared and it looks really nice.
I guess you have been made a host, so you should be able to share.
Yes, let's try once more. Otherwise, I'll just have to skip that part. No, it doesn't work.
Sorry.
I'll go to the presentation straight on. First, the natural resources in the Arctic Ocean. I'm not going to talk very much about the Arctic as a whole, but if you take the Arctic as a whole, it's just a lot bigger, greater problems. We have energy resources, minerals, biological, which have not been discussed very much so far, and also these transport routes. And I don't think the transport routes are the big problem here, because we are saving a lot of energy when we use those routes. But there are risks. I'm not denying that at all. Concerning the energy resources, it's gas and oil mainly, but we also have nuclear input sort of from uranium. And this is mostly in the Russian and Norwegian areas of the Arctic Ocean. Concerning mineral resources, it's phosphate, which is very interesting for increasing production of food.
Lars,
okay,
I've managed
if you can
to
get that running.
Lars, just to say, I've managed to.
It's not this picture. It's,
you tell me which one
yes,
to go
but
for.
go to number 4, I think. Next.
Okay,
And the next after that. No,
Right,
that's
this
too
one.
far.
oh, I'm doing this with my
No,
mouse.
no, go back, please go back. It's number 4. But I'll just go on. We have this phosphate, which is very important to produce food. We have aluminium, iron, copper, nickel, which is very important for all those batteries we are producing today. It's really important product. We have palladium, which is used for catalytic converters in cars, and this is something which was not very interesting 20, 30, 50 years ago. Oh, sorry, 20, 30 years ago. But it is today. It's really important. Diamond is just very, very valuable. It's maybe not very, very, very interesting. Then we can go to the next picture. It's about biological resources. And if you consider melting of ice and all these streams of water coming from lower levels and going up to the surface, like we have in the areas around Iceland and Norway, and also along the coast of especially Chile in Latin America. This is a very important resource, but if we mismanage the extraction of all these different resources, the value of this fish will be less. There are other, probably rather important other biological resources. Then of course, we have all these things with biodiversity, which we have to protect. So it's a very complex issue here, but still it's I think it's more important than has been stressed so far in the other presentations, which I think have been really, really interesting. For the next, please, transport routes. It's both on the Russian side, north of Russia, and Norway, and then also on the Canadian-US side or Alaska side. I believe the Russian side is more economically valuable. It's probably easier to have access to it. And as I said, this is probably to some or to a large extent, I think it's a good thing. But we also have problems. I'm not, as I said, I'm not denying that. Let's take the next one. Then it's about ownership. And we have these national economic zones, which are defined by international regulations. And then we have some areas in the Arctic Sea, which is international waters. It's owned by nobody. Anybody can come from, as I understand the rules, from China or Brazil to extract those resources. And I'll show you a map very soon. Then you have also what is ownership. It's the legal formal agreements which regulates ownership. But you also have the real access to natural resources. It also has to do with military power, and that has been touched upon in various ways by the other speakers. It's a very complex thing to deal with. Next, please. This is a map of the North Pole. So you have on the right side, you have Russia. On the left side, you have Alaska and Canada, and on the more left or southern side, you have Greenland, which is Denmark, and then Norway especially. And then you can see easily that just with this picture, Russia has almost half of the whole. I'm not talking about the areas which are on the outside of this. I'm talking about the Arctic Ocean, which is the central part here. And then if you let's take the next one, please. And as an environmental economist, or a resource economist rather, I'm very interested in what is the value. And if you look at this, if you look at the deep parts of this Arctic Ocean, you can see all the way down to Canada, almost to the border of Alaska, and all the way passing over Greenland, and covering the North Pole. You have very deep waters. That means that some of those resources will never be used. It's just too costly to extract them. So they're not interesting. And almost all the resources that are easy to extract are on the Russian border side, the Russian economic zones. And if you consider also the ice cover, the all-year ice cover, it is north and somewhat west of the Canadian large islands and Greenland, and covering all around the North Pole, which is not the same but similar to this very deep waters. So the conclusion here is that Norway, but much less of course, and Russia very much, are the ones who have access to resources that are economically reasonable to extract or try to extract. This I think this is very important. Let's go to the next, please. And then when we discuss these things, we have environment, various parts of the environment, biodiversity, pollution, and so on. And we have climate. We have also what is fair for people, and so on. And there, if we extract not all, but most of these resources, we will never extract all of them. But if we extract most of these resources, we have very serious threats, because there are so many dimensions here. And if you extract a lot of oil and gas from this territory, you will get there will be oil spills, and there will be pollution. And for some of the minerals, there will also be serious problems. For some others, that's a rather small problem. You can go down with a robot and pick up some diamonds, and it would be just about nothing. So it depends on how much we extract. And that means that if we can have international cooperation that makes it very clear that we should reduce the total quantity of extraction for the important resources. If we can do that, then it is very, very good for humanity. But it's also important on how these resources are extracted. If you can do it in a very sort of careful way, then it's not such a big problem. And if you just go for the money, you can get much more serious problems than if you take it in a consider the effects. But I would say that the total quantity of some of these resources is probably the most important thing. And then you have another aspect, which is climate change. Climate change is sort of causing or creating the possibilities to get economic gains from using these resources. But once you do it, once you bring up oil and gas from these areas and use it, it's actually when you use it, you get the most important effect. You cause carbon dioxide emissions, and you increase the climate change. Climate change that has caused the situation, or created the situation we have, and it's not when you extract it. I think the most important part from the climate point of view is when you use these resources. Let's take the next, please. And then we have, as I said, it's Russia, 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 and Norway, and then maybe some others. So it's, are there any nations, or it's never, in this case, it's never small nations, it's always the big ones, who are interested in trying to get greater share than they should have, according to the international rules. And it's of course Canada. No, sorry, it's of course United States and to some extent Canada. But Canada doesn't have the same pressure because they have a lot of energy resources in relation to the population and in relation to its industry and so on. So it's United States, it's a country that has the greatest interest in trying to get a greater share. And it's not, as I have probably made clear from earlier, it's not Russia and Norway. They have, especially Russia, they have more than they maybe can take care of. I don't know. It's actually not in their interest to fight for more. And then when it comes to conflict areas, I think if we can go back to the picture where with the economic zones, please. It's several steps back.
I will have to see if I can do that.
Yeah, in any case, I think on the continental shelf north of Russia, where you come into the white area, which is the international, no country has the right to it. There you can have interests from other countries to drill for oil or gas, and then it will be a conflict between Russia, who might be a kilometer away from that, and drilling for oil. So that is a case where you may get problems. And then if I have time, I think I have time.
Well, yeah, you've kind of run out of time, but are we're nearly
I
there
did.
anyway,
Okay,
aren't
then
we?
I'll stop. I can come back. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. All right. That was wonderful. Thank you, Lars. I'll just work out how to get rid of this. Just a moment, because there we go. Wonderful. Thank you very, very much, Lars. That was fascinating. And also, you know, there was some new information in there as to the international waters and the potential for economic exploitation of those areas, which I found particularly useful. Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll move on now to our next speaker, who is from the Denmark and Greenland area. Palle Benson, a longtime climate, environmental and anti-nuclear activist. He's been involved in opposition to uranium mining plans in southern Greenland, and also is engaged in the Danish Center for Conflict Resolution. So I'll leave him to introduce himself, because he's really done a lot of things, and this little bio is quite long. The subject he's speaking to today is about the changing Arctic and the fact that the Arctic is changing again. So please, Palle, I'd be very grateful if you would take it straight from here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm Palle Benson. As Pippa said, I'm a long-time environmental and climate activist, and for the last 10 years I've been engaged in researching the nexus between the military power and environmental destruction, and also campaigning in favor of the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in a network of ICAN partner organizations here in Denmark. I'm not a specialist in the Arctic. I've never been in any part of the Arctic, But as an activist in NOAA Friends of the Earth, Denmark, I worked with allies in Greenland for the last 10 years to avoid a huge mining project at Kvanefjeld in southern Greenland. Originally a uranium project, later relabeled as a rare earth minerals project. So recently, Ulla Klotzer asked if I would take part in this webinar and cover Denmark-Greenland. But I appreciate the phrase used in Greenland, nothing about Greenland without Greenland. So I wanted to find someone more qualified than me from Greenland. I first contacted Marianne Paviasen, who has been a local lead on the mining issue, but she couldn't take part, unfortunately. Then I asked Sarah Olsvik, who's presently the international chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and unfortunately, he was not able to take part either. So here I am. Okay. What I will do is to try and give a very brief outline of Greenland's history in relation to the United States. I'm building partly on an article by Sarah Olsvik that I mentioned and Mark Jacobson. And I will not go into interpreting the present situation in Greenland. So, yeah, the changing Arctic is both the natural and the geopolitical conditions that are changing, and just as elsewhere. And the most important and lasting changes are the physical changes due to climate change caused by human activities all over the world, but most heavily, of course, in the industrialized countries. And these changes in Greenland will in turn influence the whole world. Other speakers have talked about the new shipping routes and mineral extraction. And all this can have large implications for the Arctic people, for the life in the sea, and for the environment as a whole. This means new opportunities, new risks, new interests, and new conflicts. The geopolitical changes have similar great consequences for people and the environment. Military armament anywhere in the Arctic will have repercussions elsewhere. You may remember that in 2019, President Trump announced his interest in buying Greenland. It was immediately ridiculed and rejected. It showed, of course, the mindset of Donald Trump as a real estate tycoon, but reflected actually ideas in the US that over the last 200 years have pivoted around natural resources and strategic security interests. In 2019, the Greenlandic government responded on Twitter, "We open for business, not for sale." So I'll go back all the way back to 1823, actually, when the Monroe Doctrine was formulated, a cornerstone in American foreign policy. It did not mention Greenland. President Monroe drew a clear antagonistic line between United States and the European powers when he declared that United States, quote, should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety, end quote. So this is as I see it, a view that has been upheld over the last 2 centuries in the United States. Well, 10 years after that, President Andrew Jackson showed a strategic interest in Greenland by floating the idea of actually purchasing Greenland. Fast forward to 1916, then Robert Peary, the American explorer, he referred to the Monroe Doctrine when he said that Greenland geographically belonged to North America and the Western Hemisphere and would be more valuable from a security and geostrategic standpoint for the US than the West Indies. The West Indies, why that? Yeah, because there were negotiations between Denmark and United States about US buying the Danish West Indies. And the year after, actually, Denmark sold the Danish West Indies to the US with the population there for $25 million in gold. Today, it's known as the Virgin Islands. Okay, in 1930, the Danish Prime Minister at that time felt it necessary to declare once more that Greenland is not for sale. Well, then I have to say a few words about what happened between the two world wars in a material sense, because aviation changed military strategic thinking, and one rare mineral, cryolite, that had been used in various chemical industries became important in producing aluminium. Cryolite was only found in the Ivitut mine in southern Greenland, so Greenland became acutely interesting. And when the war broke out, the Second World War, US secured or securitized Greenland in order to avoid a German invasion and takeover of this cryolite mine. And in line with the Monroe Doctrine, they had the Danish ambassador to Washington famously sign an agreement with the US, contrary to orders from the Danish government, because it was under heavy German influence, you know. So, and that agreement more or less gave the US free rein to do whatever they wanted during the war. This was the first round of militarization of Greenland. Navy and army bases were built, and 6,000 American military personnel were stationed at a time when Greenland's population totaled 21,000. But it also gave Greenlanders their first experience in 200 years of relating to another state outside the channels of the Danish government, and it gave some in Greenland's elite a taste for independence of sorts. After World War II ended, Denmark wanted to end the US presence, but that was not accepted by the US. After some years of infight, Denmark accepted the status quo as part of the new geostrategic divide between Soviet and the US. So in 1951, a second defense agreement was signed, and that led to the establishment of the Thule Air Base that soon had 10,000 personnel, airstrips, and a harbor and a whole modern town. The people that lived there already were forced to relocate with very short notice, less than 2 weeks before the ending of Greenland's status as a colony, when in 1953 Greenland was integrated into the Kingdom of Denmark. Then in 1957, the Danish Prime Minister, in the middle of the Cold War, you know, H.C. Hansen, he tacitly and secretly accepted that the US Air Force stored nuclear weapons at Thule Air Base, in spite of Denmark's ban of all nuclear weapons on its territory. And that was not revealed to the public before in the late 90s. In 1960, actually, President Eisenhower aired the idea of buying Greenland. So they kept trying. From 1961 to 1968, the US Air Force ran Operation Chrome Dome, in which B-52 bombers armed with thermonuclear weapons were continuously airborne, flying routes that encircle the United States and Canada and put them in position to attack the Soviet Union if they were ordered to do so. The routes often went over Greenland's coast up to Thule. That operation ended when one such bomber crashed on the ice near Thule Air Base with 4 hydrogen bombs. And they didn't explode or anything, but of course that was a situation. And it had repercussions for a long time with all the personnel that were ordered out to do the cleanup. In 1979, home rule government was introduced in Greenland. In 2001, US further securitized Thule Air Base as a part of the global war on terrorism. And then in 2004, there was an agreement called Igaliku Agreement. It amended the 1951 agreement in a way that Greenland's agency was acknowledged. In 2009, self-government was introduced in Greenland, initiating a process that could or would end in independence from Denmark. In 2018, on US request, the Danish government prevented Chinese involvement in building of a new green airport in Greenland. And about the same time, the US Senate asked the Pentagon to select one or more places where military bases could be established in Greenland. It did not spur much debate, as I've been able to detect. What about my time? Pippa?
I'm afraid you have run over time already.
Okay, I'll leave out I wanted to say a few words about the Inuit Circumpolar Council, but that's all right. Yeah.
Well, if we have any left at the end, I'm sure I'll be able to come back to you. But thank you very, very much for that understanding of the historical context of Greenland. I'm not going to chat myself now. I'm going to hand straight over to our next speaker, who is from Finland, Teemu Matunkuro, the Executive Director of the Finnish Peace Committee. And he's going to talk about Finland, NATO, the DCA in the Arctic. So please, Teemu, if you're ready, would you like to take it from here? Teemu, are you...
Yes, now I'm allowed to speak. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and I can see you now. Hello.
Yes, okay. Yes, and I will try to be shorter than the others because we are already running out of time and it would be very interesting to discuss. And there's a lot of details in all the speeches that would have been included, so better not to repeat those issues which are more related to the emerging importance of Arctic, which has always been there, but now it's sort of, how would I say, come up to the surface. But then I will talk a bit about, the changing position of the Nordic countries as when Finland and Sweden joined the NATO. And at the same time, I think even the membership in the NATO is not that important as are the defense cooperation agreements that all the Nordic countries have signed with US, which basically means that the Nordic area, which used to be only mainly Norway, which had the American bases, a couple of them with very strong restrictions, as we know in Norway, that for the use. And of course, now they have been more east and there are more. And I could show, but I don't know if I can share the screen with you. Wait a second. Can I do it? Maybe you see now.
Yes, we have it. Thank you.
Yes. So this is the case now that the Nordic countries has become crucial part of the global US presence in the world in, I think, about 2,200 bases around the world in all over the world. And we have become a very strong part of that. And as you can see, it's mainly the Norway which has the interest in the Arctic, but of course we have also the Inari, which is there in the Sami area in the north. And actually, when I don't know how it was in Norway or Sweden, but also in Finland, I think these indigenous people, the Sami people in the north, they were never consulted, though according to Finnish legislation, they should be considered on all the agreements affecting their home area, which is the northern part of Finland, mainly the tip of the Finland. So that was a thing, and there was no real discussion. And I think in Sweden you have a bit more discussion about the DCA, but in Finland I think it's like an unanimous decision with very few discussion in the parliament. And of course, this agreement, it's really one-sided. There are minor differences between the Norwegian and Swedish and Finnish and Danish agreements, which is really strange. For example, the Norway mentions specifically the nuclear weapons as something that is not allowed, but the Finnish agreement doesn't say. It only refers to US that it will, how do you say, respect Finnish commitments in international law and respects Finnish sovereignty, whatever it means. It doesn't, the wording doesn't mean that they have to do it, but it just shows their wish that they will respect, not to show that they would be under the Finnish legal system. So, and that's been a worrying factor. And now there are discussions because the ban of nuclear weapons in the Finnish territory or passing them in the Finnish territory is only in our nuclear energy law. And now they are thinking of renewing that. And our prime minister from the Moderator, right-wing party, they have started talking about this, that we should lift the ban of our nuclear weapons, being they are mainly talking about whether they would be like not stationed permanently, but like allowed to be in Finland, in the Finnish territory. And of course, this would be very crucial, totally making the situation totally different in the Nordic countries. And I think we are very worried because that would mean that if we, say that it's not anymore banned to have nuclear weapons in our territory, it's up to the Russians to guess whether we have or not. And I don't know whether we could ever trust the US anyhow, whether they have, like we heard from the Greenland experience, whether they have nuclear weapons or not in our territory. So this is changing quite a lot the Baltic Sea region. But at the same time, I have to say that in this Arctic issue, and it was really nice to hear that during the Arctic Council, they have restarted a bit the official contacts between the Arctic in the Arctic Council in these 6 working groups, because as I don't know if you have heard that it has been very difficult to be in any contact with the Russian either NGOs or state actors because it's totally banned here. And actually 2 researchers who had been in contact specifically in the Arctic issue and then the nuclear weapons, they were sort of banned from the university, etc. There was a huge scandal here when they were lambasted, these 2 researchers who had contact with the Russian researchers and Russian state actors as well in the conferences, etc. But of course, we know we have, as a peace committee, a long history of cooperation with the Russian NGOs. And unfortunately, like Oleg said, that's not possible anymore, because any contact with the foreign NGO can endanger their activity, or they can be banned or put in prison as a foreign agents, etc. So I know a lot of environmental groups working in Russia, but for them, the connection to the NGOs outside of Russia is like a kiss of death. So they would really welcome this cooperation, but they can't do it. And then talking about these indigenous people, and I think actually in Arctic, the problem in Russia started already in 2019 when they had the chairmanship, when they started banning the cooperation organizations of these indigenous groups. And several of these leaders, they had to flew out of the country, especially in Norway. So at the moment, the voice of the indigenous people in Russia is totally silent or done by these governmentally organized NGOs, I would say. So that's a big difficulty. And even, you know, the normal cooperation between the people, as you know, I don't know if you have heard, the Finland has closed the border already for half a year. There is no passing over the Russian border because of the illegal immigrants that Russia is claimed to use to get to seek asylum in Finland. And I heard that the Norway, which I have been very hopeful that they would have kept the border open, but I heard just lately that the Norway is also closing the border in the north. So basically now the cooperation between the civil societies to Russia is impossible and dangerous. So at the same time, and it was good to hear that in the Arctic Council they have started to keep some connections in the scientific level, because it has been really worrying, and I know the Finnish environmentalist that it's crucial for understanding the climate change, that the data, what is going on in Siberia with the permafrost and in the Arctic, is crucial for these models, that they could somehow see what is going on. But as I said, you know, all the connections were cut, and I think it's really difficult to see, as we know, the war in Ukraine as it continues. There is no roadmap out of, first of all, out of the conflict or the war, but also how to re-establish these connections on issues that are not issues of war and peace, but which would be very important for the scientific community, the international scientific community. So I think we are in the cul-de-sac, so that and nobody knows how to start moving back to normal cooperation. And as we have made these commitments and sanctions and all that, it looks like that it's sort of forces Putin to continue until the end, because he has no way out from his position that he has himself paid by attacking aggressively to Ukraine. But thank you. I was hopefully not repeating all the issues that were discussed on the other very interesting.
Thank you
Yes.
so much, Timu. That was interesting. And as we watch NATO spread like a plague across the northern countries, and with the sanctions, and what you were saying about having any connections with any Russian organizations is almost a kiss of death to an individual now, not just for you in Finland, but actually for all of us in the United States, in the United Kingdom. We're all suffering from this, and we have to find a way to keep international cooperation going on some level, even on this level. And I think a lot of connections have been made today, I hope useful ones, that we can continue with. I see we have 3 hands up. Now it's up to you. We really have come to the end of our 2 hours, and thank you for staying with us, all of you. It's fantastic. So I'll take you in order. Just very quickly, please, if you could ask your question. Kirsten, could you go first?
Okay. Yes, I think that because our parliaments have not yet decided, we should try to press them to decide not to DCA, because it is very, very catastrophic for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Ulla?
Yes, just to mention that Oleg and I, we are longtime friends. We met in the 1992 on a big Baltic conference in St. Petersburg. And we are actually trying to form a group of willing people going to St. Petersburg for a round table conference of peace activists to show that we have a right to meet, we have a right to see each other and to be a model for dialogue and cooperation. So I will return to this and try to form this group of courageous activists. Thank you.
Sounds fantastic, Ola. Sounds amazing. Agneta, you're muted at the moment.
Yes, thank you very much. As a long peace activist, as a women peace activist, I'm a little bit overwhelmed with a overwhelming male lecturing. That's why we formed Women for Peace, because we were always shut up in a way that I now recognize again, not physically, of course, but the majority here is a baffling male, and I'm really upset. That's why I went into the Women Against NATO in the first place, because I thought it would be a place where we could discuss with each other. I like all the men here. It's not that. I know Lars Strake, he's an excellent man. That was that. But what I wanted to ask the Danish is about the Thule base and about the Inuits. That's my question. The Inuits, is it true that the leader of the Inuit in Greenland were bought up, like those in Reykjavik, who allow now again the US to establish Keflavik? Because the US bases during the Cold War are again regained, because they closed Keflavik in Iceland, where they had nuclear weapons, but now again. But we have nobody from Iceland here, I'm seeing. But from Denmark, I would like to know if you know anything about how they managed to buy the Inuits to let the US do what they are doing in Greenland today. Thank you.
Right, who would like to take Agneta's question about the Inuit? I think Palle Benson, yes?
Yeah. I don't want to speak on behalf of the Greenlandic people, of course, and I can't say for sure because there's something implied in the question you put, Agneta, that I really don't know how to answer. But I know that there was an opinion poll recently about cooperation with the United States, and that was like 75% of the Greenlandic, the respondents were in favor of a greater cooperation with the United States. So there's no, I think that, yeah, I dare to say that that many Greenlanders have seen cooperation with, for instance, the United States as an alternative to this centuries-long dominance by Denmark, and that's probably one part of it. But I think also, I mean, there's always been a very strong connection between Denmark and Greenland in many aspects, not only the colonial status for several hundred years, but also in the way that many people are intermarried. There are many families in Greenland that are mixed, and many in Denmark too. So it's not such a clear thing, but there's a strong drive for independence in Greenland, that's for sure. But I think the problem for them is that to have an economic basis for that, because it's very hard to have a modern society on such a large area with such a small population. So they need outside the fisheries, which is about 95% of the exports of the fisheries, and that's sometimes a very fragile thing to run. And that's why some politicians have wanted a lot more mineral extraction. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't
Okay.
know if that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think we should wrap up now. So thank you very much to Global Women for Peace, United Against NATO, and to the Finnish peace movement for putting this together. Also to say that the supporters of this webinar, as well as Global Women for Peace, United Against NATO, are UNAC, the United National Anti-War Coalition, and that's based in the US, the International Peace Bureau, the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, World Beyond War, and No to NATO. So a reminder, once again, that NATO is celebrating its 75th anniversary in Washington, D.C. this July. And so there are alternative conferences planned and various rallies. There are a lot of issues that will be included, and there will be also a lot of people supporting what is happening across the globe in terms of the demonization of Russia. After all, what did Russia ever do to us apart from win World War II? We have to really stay together for the sake of humanity and the planet and all the biodiversity therein to stop overexploitation of the Arctic. It would be nice if there was agreement to do no exploitation at all, but that's probably too much to ask. I think we have to work together and perhaps try and strengthen the Arctic Council in this mission now to stop the spread of this predatory capitalism that takes all and doesn't care what mess it leaves behind us. So on that note, thank you, everybody. Thank you very much to our sponsors. Thank you very much for all the hardworking women who put this together. Yes, wouldn't it be nice if it was all women? But let's take expertise where we find it without prejudice, because it's good for us all to have this knowledge. Personally, I look forward to listening to this again. There was so much in it that I would like to hear again and embed in my own mind. So let us draw strength from each other in our community of dedicated people for peace and against NATO and the expansion of it. My love to all of you, all the speakers who took part today, and to all of you who stayed with us and who are listening again through the recording. Stay strong. Good night.